Hello everybody, welcome back to American Textbook Reading. I'm Brian Stuart. We're continuing in our subject of physical science. We're on chapter 14 or lesson 14. We're talking about solids, liquids, and gas. Now this is a very interesting subject when we think about it. We're continuing to talk about matter. Remember, matter is everything that's around us. It's interesting to note, and we will discover in this lesson, that matter has three forms. There's only three forms for all the matter we can think of. What are those forms? Solid, liquid, and gas, right? Let's cover those different types of forms. First of all, we have solid, as I saw before. These, of course, are marbles. They're probably granite or glass, and these are solid. What is a solid? A solid is a form of matter with its own shape. So if a certain type of matter out there in the world has its own specific shape, it has a shape that is defined. It's a triangle. It's a sphere. It's a circle or whatever. A sphere, by the way, that's the shape here that we see of these marbles. A sphere, this is a sphere. It's a round shape, but it has three dimensions. Just two dimensions would be a circle. But anyway, of course, solids have three dimensions, so we say it's a sphere. Solids can be triangular in shape. They can have a shape that we can't describe, right? Some shapes are very strange, but it has a certain type of shape, and that shape doesn't change. That is a solid, okay? Next, we have a liquid. A liquid, what is a liquid? How is it different from a solid? A liquid is matter that flows. In other words, if you took this glass and you turned it, that liquid would flow out of the glass onto the table or the ground, and it would spread out. It would flow. It would move freely and takes the shape of its container. So this glass, which is a solid, right, is holding the liquid on the inside. So the liquid takes the shape of the solid glass shape on the inside, right? So that's an interesting feature about liquid. And also liquid will flow out. Gravity will make it flow out from a high place to a low place. So liquid will always seek the lowest place. It will follow the pressure of gravity and seek the lowest place in something. And that is a liquid, okay? Okay, and then there's our third form of matter. We talked about solid, we talked about liquid. The third form of matter is a gas. What is a gas? A gas is matter that changes shape to fill its container. Hey, wait a minute. That's the same definition as liquid, right? But what is unique about gas? What makes gas different from liquid? Well, when we fill a container with liquid, the liquid is more affected by gravity. The liquid will fill up the bottom part of the container, but if there's not enough liquid, it won't fill up the top part. The top part of that container will be empty if there's not enough liquid to fill it. However, if you fill a container with gas, that gas will fill all of the container, not just the bottom, but the top and the sides too. The gas will spread out to all parts of the container, so the pressure inside this container is the same anywhere in this container. But with a liquid, right, if we have a glass and we have some liquid here, the pressure here is greater than the pressure here. See, this is the container, right? This top part is not filled by the liquid, but in a container here, all of the container is filled by the gas. That's the main difference between a gas and a liquid. Okay, let's move on. Now, when we talk about other ways to describe these different states, we have this word here, vapor. Vapor is an interesting word. It's an interesting state. I just used the example of water, right? Vapor is water in the air that you can sometimes see. Vapor is actually a gas. It's a gas that's very close between the stage of liquid and gas, right? It's not a liquid anymore. It is becoming a gas, okay? We can still see it, right? But as you can see, gravity doesn't really affect it. Vapor, the water vapor is coming up out of the surface of the liquid of the water. Also, vapor is what we feel in the summertime. When we feel hot and sticky, It's because there's humidity in the air, and that humidity is water in the air. That's water vapor as well. Let's take a look at a video showing us a little bit more information about vapor. As we can see, it's very similar. We're boiling eggs. These are eggs in a pot. You can see the water. I'll show it to you before I play the video. You can see little bubbles of air, this is gas, forming in the water before the water actually starts to get really agitated. And that is forming the gas, the vapor that will come off. And we can see now, we can see the vapor that's coming off the surface of the water. And that's vapor. Okay? So it's interesting also to note, we've talked about the three types of matter, solid, liquid, gas. How do they change, right? Like I use the example of water. Why is water sometimes ice? Why is water sometimes liquid? And why is water sometimes heat? In this picture, you can see what's the change between water, liquid, and water as a vapor? It's heat, right? If we apply heat to a solid, it will turn into a liquid. If we give it more heat, it will turn into a gas. So heat, the temperature of something, will make it change the form that it is in, from a solid to a liquid to a gas, and also back the other way if you reduce or take away the temperature. Here we have freeze. Now I was talking about temperature, right? Freeze has to do with very cold temperatures, right? If you freeze something, you change it from a liquid to a solid. And here's our example of water again. If you take water, liquid water, and you take away heat, you lower the temperature, what happens? It freezes, becomes a solid. It is now ice. Okay? So when you freeze something, it becomes a solid. It goes from a liquid to a solid. So liquid to solid. And solid. And freeze means you lower the temperature of something. And so that liquid becomes a solid. Okay, when we say it's freezing outside, that means the temperature is so low that liquid water will turn into ice. Ooh, it's freezing outside. This is what happens in the winter. Okay, we talked about a little bit about a container. We talked about liquid will take the shape of its container. A container, of course, is something that you can put things in. Now, sure, you could put solids into this container. If we had those marbles we saw at the beginning, you know, the spheres, the marbles, if we put the marbles in this container, the marbles will still be spheres. They won't take the shape of the container. But if we pour water into the container, then the water will take the shape of that container. And the container is just something that we can keep things in. You can keep solids, you can keep liquids, and you can keep gas in a container too. When scuba divers go underwater, they keep their air in a container. It's a scuba tank on their back, right? So these are different types of containers. Melt. Now here's another one. We talked about freeze before, right? Now the opposite of freeze is to melt. If you have ice and you raise the temperature, what happens to the ice? The ice changes from a solid to a liquid. So now we are going from a solid to a liquid. Whoops, liquid. Yeah, it's a Q. So, oh, I have to work on my handwriting. Solid goes into a liquid because we're melting it. We're increasing the temperature of the solid so that it becomes a liquid. This looks like an ice cream bar. Melt means to change from a solid to a liquid. An ice cream bar has to be cold. If you leave the ice cream bar out on a hot, sunny day, you're raising the temperature, it turns into a liquid. Changes from a solid to a liquid. And that's what's going on there. So freeze and melt are opposites. Okay? Boil. Now here, boil is another word that's similar to freeze and to melt. Boil, when we're talking about boil, we are going from a liquid. Now we are going from liquid to a gas. So again, we're talking about heat. If we increase the temperature of something, if we give it heat, that substance, this liquid, will eventually boil. Boil means to make a liquid hot. So hot that gas forms in the liquid. That liquid, the parts of the liquid become so far apart that they start to form a gas, and the gas will come off the top of the liquid. the liquid will change into a gas. And if you keep that heat on, all of the liquid will go away. It will all be changed into a gas, and you won't have any more liquid. It'll all go away magically. It's not magic, but it seems like magic because it will all disappear from the container. So that is changing a liquid to a gas. So we have freeze, we have melt, and we have boil. Okay. Now we've talked about this before, flow. And basically flow means for a liquid to move smoothly. And I already talked about this, right? If you have a container full of water and you tip that container over, what happens is the liquid inside the container will flow smoothly and evenly into another container, or if there's no container here, it'll flow out all over the table or the floor, whatever you're pouring the liquid onto. Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, we have our nice chart here. We have different types of matter. Well, we have matter. We have the different forms of matter. Remember, we're talking about solid, liquid, gas. This is the coldest. This is the hottest, okay, in terms of what the matter is. When we talk about a solid, we have a picture in the middle, and then we have the description to describe or give a definition of what that is. So a solid, we can see an apple. An apple is a solid. It has its own shape, right? It doesn't change shape according to the container in which it's in. It has its own unique shape. A solid has its own shape. Liquid. Here we have a pitcher of water, and a liquid does not have its own shape, right? It doesn't have its own shape. The pitcher of glass, that is a solid. It has its own shape, and what happens is the liquid is taking the shape of its container. The container is a solid, right? So the liquid inside that is taking the same shape as the container. A gas. Inside these balloons is a gas, air. Well, maybe not air. A different type of gas could be, for example, helium. Helium is a very light gas, right? It will go up. Gravity doesn't really affect helium. It will just go up into the atmosphere, right? Helium also has less pressure than the surrounding air, so that's another reason why it goes up. A gas does not have its own shape. It also spreads to fill its container, and gas is much lighter than liquid. Okay, we do have a video about gas, so let's take a look at a short video, and we're going to see how gas takes the shape of the container in which it is placed. What we have, of course, here is a balloon. Whoa, it becomes big because they're forcing gas into that balloon. So the balloon, of course, is a shape of a sphere, right? Now watch what happens. They're letting it out. They're letting that air out, or that gas out, and basically it's just coming out, so the balloon returns to its original shape, right? But the gas is pushing out against the balloon, but the balloon shape is a sphere, right? So it's filling up that shape to conform to the solid rubber balloon. Okay, now let's take a look at these words we've just talked about and match them to their definitions. The words that we have here: solid, liquid, gas, vapor, container, freeze. These are our words. Let's match them to the definitions. The first definition here is 1. A form of matter that flows. Remember the different forms of matter: solid, liquid, gas. Which one of those three flows very smoothly from one area to another? If you chose liquid, that would be correct, because if you pour water out from a pitcher, it will flow onto the table or the ground. Number 2, a form of matter with its own shape. Remember, there's only one form of matter with its own shape. It doesn't change, right? Unless you break it, right? Unless some other force acts on it. But by itself, just sitting there by itself, it has its own shape. It doesn't change. What form of matter is that? Solid, liquid, or gas? It is, of course, solid. If you chose solid, you would be correct. Number 3, a form of matter that spreads to fill all the space of its container. Spreads to fill all the space. Now this is an interesting point between the different forms of matter. We have solid, we have liquid, we have gas, right? Now liquid, if you pour it into a container, it will fill the bottom of the container. But if it doesn't fill all the way up to the top, then that space is empty. But if you put a gas into a container, it will fill all the space, not just the bottom, but also the top. This answer is gas, right? So gas will fill all the space of the container. That's what they're talking about here. So if you put that gas, as we saw, into the balloon, it doesn't just fill the bottom of the balloon, it fills the top and the sides too. It fills all the space of the container. That would be the gas. Okay, let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is to change from a liquid to a solid. Do you remember we talked about that? There's some different words that we describe the change from one form to another form. Now here we have liquid, right? We have a liquid and we want to change it to a solid. So do you remember what we called that? What that process is? Which one? We call it to freeze. So we're freezing, we're reducing the temperature of the liquid. It freezes and it becomes a solid. So if we reduce the temperature of water, which is a liquid, it freezes, becomes ice, which is a solid. Okay, number 5. Water in the air that you can sometimes see. Sometimes you can see it. It's a gas, right? But it's right after, when we're changing liquid to a gas, it's right in between that stage. Right at that stage where it's changing from liquid to a gas. We saw the video. What are we talking about that? How do we describe it? We call that a vapor. Vapor. It's when the water is turning into a gas. You can sometimes see it, but it's actually gaseous water changing from a liquid to a gas, and it's water vapor. Okay, number 6. Something that you can put things in. We talked about this, right? We talked about taking the shape. Liquid will take the shape of this. If you put liquid into this thing, it will take the shape of its what? Container. That is correct. It will take the shape of its container. Container is something that you can put things in. Okay, let's move on to our chart here. For the chart, the title, we have forms of water. Remember, we're talking about 3 different forms. And it's not just water, it's all matter. All matter has different forms. Water is just an easy example because water is very common and we can see the different changes of water very easily. It's very difficult to see the different forms of rock, for example, because for rock to become a liquid, it has to be really, really hot, and that's very, very dangerous. But water, we can see ice, and it's not so dangerous if it's cold, it's just freezing out. We drink liquid water, and of course we see water when it's a gas. Okay, so these are the 3 forms of water. When it's a solid, it's frozen inside the glass here. It's ice, or ice cubes are inside the glass here. Then all the ice melts and it's just liquid, right? Turns into a liquid, and then it turns into a gas. Notice these arrows. These arrows are red for heat. These are blue for cold. So if you're going from a solid ice to liquid, you're increasing the temperature. The temperature is getting hotter. That's symbolized by red color, by the red here. Then we have a liquid here, and if you increase the temperature, it becomes a gas. And that also works in the same way going back. This is a cycle. This is a cycle, okay? If you start with a gas and you decrease the temperature, you make it colder, it turns into a liquid. And then if you make it colder even more from a liquid, it goes back to a solid. So this is a good chart to show not only the different forms of matter, but also how they change. Remember, how do they change? By temperature. Changes in the temperature. They become hotter or they become colder. Either way, they go both ways. Okay? Very important to take a look at. Okay, now let's take a look. It's kind of like a little test here. We have 3 different pictures. These are water. We're using water as our example of matter again. We have 3 different states or 3 different forms of water. Let's talk about them. In the first picture, we have a glass of water. Now, this glass of water, if I take this glass of water and I pour it out, the water will flow evenly and slow out onto the ground or the table. The water does not fill up the entire glass. There's some space here. So it's not filling the entire shape of the container. What is it? Is it a solid or is it a liquid? Well, if you chose liquid, that would be correct because it takes the shape of its container. It doesn't fill up all of the container, and if you pour it out, it will flow out nice and easy. So that's a liquid. Number 2. Now, we have a combination actually, okay? But let's just concentrate on these objects inside the liquid. So this is liquid on the outside. But what are these objects here? This is ice. Ice has its own shape, right? It doesn't flow. It doesn't fill up the entire container. If we put it in a container, it keeps its original shape. What do we call that? We would call that a solid. Okay, those are solids. Solids have their own shape. Finally, number 3. We're not concerned about this here. What we're concerned about is here, this area up here. So basically this form of water is rising up, right? It's in the air. We can't see it. Sometimes you can see it, right? If it's hot, you can see just very traces of it, small little bits of it coming up. But usually we can't see it, right? And it expands. If we put this in a container, it would fill up all the parts of the container, not just the bottom of the container, but the top and the sides, everywhere around, not just the bottom. What would that be? We're talking about a gas. It would be a gas. Okay, let's move on to our true-false questions. Again, we're going to circle true if the sentence is true, and if the sentence is false, we will circle F. Number 1, a solid has its own shape. Is that true or not? We just talked about that. Sure, solids have their own shape. That is true. Number 2, gas is a matter that is solid. Doesn't make sense because we're talking about 3 forms of matter. It can be a solid, it can be a liquid, or it can be a gas. But it can't be both at the same time. It can't be a solid and a liquid at the same time, right? So that doesn't make sense. Gas is a matter that is solid. It's a gas and a solid at the same time? No, that's impossible. We say false, okay? Number 3. If you freeze water, it changes to ice. So if you have a liquid, water is a liquid, and you freeze it, you reduce the temperature, it becomes ice. Is that true or not? That is absolutely true. So if we reduce the temperature of water, it changes to a solid form, and that is ice. Okay, that wraps up our vocabulary section and learning about these ideas and concepts. Now we're going to take a short break, come back, and take a look at the reading. Don't go away. See you soon. Okay, welcome back. Let's cover the reading section for Lesson 14. We're talking about 3 forms of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Our topic sentence: all things are made of matter. Matter has 3 forms. So really our topic sentence is actually over here. Matter has 3 forms. This is just a statement that we already know. We already know that. All things are made of matter. Our topic sentence really is matter has 3 forms. That's what we're talking about here, the 3 forms. What are the 3 forms? They are solid, liquid, and gas. So now we're going to find out some more details about these 3 different forms. So we start off with a solid. A solid is matter with its own shape. It has its own shape. The shape doesn't change by itself, right? If we come along, we knock on it or something, some force is applied to it, then it might change shape. But by itself, it won't change shape. It has its own shape. For example, a rock and a book are solids. A rock has its own shape. Left by itself, it'll stay the same shape. A book has its own shape. If we don't rip it or tear it or burn it, it will retain its own shape. It will keep its own shape. Even if we move a solid, so we move the rock from one place to another, it's still the same shape. If we take up the book and put it away in the bookshelf, it's still the same shape. It keeps its shape. So the solid will keep its shape. Okay, let's move on to the second form. The second form is liquid. A liquid is matter that flows, right? If we pour it out, it will flow to another area. Water and oil are liquids. Oil is also a liquid. Oil is heavier than water. A liquid does not have its own shape. If we pour water or juice or oil into this glass, it will take the shape of the glass. The glass is tall and skinny. The water or the oil or the juice will also become tall and skinny. Another thing about liquid is it will only fill the bottom of its container. It won't fill all of the container. It'll only fill the bottom of the container. Now, a gas is a matter that does not have its own shape like a liquid. Liquid and gas are similar. They do not have their own shape. A gas spreads to fill all the space of its container, right? When you blow a balloon, the air spreads out and fills all the space of it. It doesn't just fill the bottom of the balloon, it fills all the space of the balloon. And that makes it different from a liquid. Because if you put a liquid in the liquid would only fill up the bottom part of the balloon, right? But a gas fills all the balloon, all the top, the bottom, the sides, all of the containers, all of the space inside the container. It fills up it all. That's the difference between a gas and a liquid. Now, matter can change forms. We have three different forms: solid, liquid, gas, but matter can change forms, right? If we freeze a liquid, it changes to a solid. So freeze a liquid and it changes to a solid. If you freeze water, it changes to ice. So this is a general statement, this is an example. Freeze a liquid, it changes to a solid. An example, water. If you freeze water, it changes to ice. Then again, we have the same two sentences, same construction. Melt a solid and it changes to liquid. Example, ice cream. And ice cream melts in the hot weather, So here we have the same idea. Boil water and it changes to a vapor. Okay, well that's a little bit different. Boil water and it changes to a vapor. So these are the three different forms, or three different ways that it can change. Freeze, melt, and boil. Remember, freeze means it goes from liquid to solid. Melt, it goes from solid to liquid. Boil, it goes from liquid to gas. Okay. Let's take a look at our reading skill. It is the main idea and the details. What's the main idea? The main idea is that matter has three forms. So matter has three forms. What are they? Beep, liquid, and gas. Okay, can you guess just by looking at this chart? Of course, we have liquid, gas. What's the other one? It's a solid, right? And of course, we got solid from these words on the bottom. Container, solid, air, flows. Let's use the rest of these words to fill in the details about each form. Over here, let's just practice. We see solid. Solid is matter with its own shape. So solid is matter with its own shape. That fits, okay? Then we come over here to liquid. Liquid, beep, it beep, right? We have something here. It does not have its own shape. It takes the shape of its beep. Okay, so let's see, what would B fit it? What could fit into B? Container? It container? No. It solid? No. It air? That doesn't make sense. Or it flows. It flows. It flows. And we just say that's a complete sentence. It flows. We pour it out. It flows. It does not have its own shape. It takes the shape of its container. So the first one will be flows, and the second one will be container. Okay? So that's what we can say about liquid. Moving on. The third form that matter can take is gas, right? Gas. Gas, remember, it spreads out to fill the space of its container, all the space, not just the bottom, but all the space. Then we have beep, in a balloon is gas. What in a balloon is gas? Well, if we chose air, that would be correct. By the way, it's the only word with a capital at the beginning, so it's a new sentence, so we know that anyway. So air in a balloon is gas. Air in a balloon is gas. The air that we blow inside a balloon is gas. Or if you fill a balloon with, for example, helium, which is another type of gas. If you breathe helium, you talk very funny, okay? But don't do that. But these are types of gas, okay? So if we put a gas in a balloon, air in a balloon is gas, but if we put gas in a balloon, it will fill up all that space inside the balloon. Okay, let's go over some reading comprehension questions. We have our questions here, and we have three answer choices. The first one is, what are two liquids? It says, what are two liquids? So the answers should have two items each. Is that true? Yeah. A, water in a balloon, that's two things. B, water and oil, that's two things. C, air and ice, that's two things. But we're looking for two things that are both liquids. They have to both be liquids. So let's take a look. Number A, water. Is water a liquid? Yes, it is. Is a balloon a liquid? No, it's not. A balloon is a solid. So A is not correct. B, water. Is water a liquid? Yeah, we just said it was. Is oil a liquid? Yes, it is. Actually, that's the answer. B, water and oil are two liquids. They are both liquids. C, Air and ice? No. Air is a gas, ice is a solid, so no way. C is absolutely not the answer. B is the answer. Number 2, if you beep, the liquid turns to a solid. So we're talking about changing from one form to another. What do you have to do to a liquid in order to turn it into a solid? Do you freeze it? Yes, actually you do. That's the answer. You don't melt it. Remember, when you melt a liquid, can you melt a liquid? That doesn't make sense. You melt a solid. You can't melt a liquid. You melt a solid, solid turns into a liquid. So you melt a solid into a liquid. So obviously B doesn't make sense. C, you blow up a liquid. That sounds really funny. It's like an explosion, right? Do you blow up a liquid? Of course, they're talking about blowing up. That's another meaning of blow up. But you can't blow up a liquid. That's just silly. Again, C doesn't make sense. Only A makes sense. You freeze a liquid, it becomes a solid. Let's move on to number 3. If you boil water, the water does what? Remember, we're talking about a change, right? So we're changing from one form to another. Water is a liquid. If you boil a liquid, what happens to that liquid? Will it become vapor, which goes into the air? Actually, that's correct, isn't it? It will become vapor, which goes into the air. Become like a gas. A vapor is a type of gas. B, it will melt, then freeze into a vapor. That doesn't make sense. Boil, of course, means you increase the temperature of something, right? If you increase the temperature, yes, something will melt, but solids melt. Liquids don't melt. So that doesn't make sense right there. Of course, and then it will freeze into a vapor. Things do not freeze into a gas. Things freeze into a solid, not into a gas. So this is wrong, and this is wrong. This just doesn't make any sense at all. So B is obviously not. C, let's just continue for practice. Though if you boil water, the water will melt. Again, water doesn't melt, so that doesn't make sense. And become ice. That just doesn't make sense. So obviously, A is the only correct answer. Becomes vapor, which goes into the air. Okay, move on. Let's move on to number 4. When you blow up a balloon, you blow air into a balloon, right? When you blow up a balloon, the gas, the air that you're blowing into the balloon, what happens to it? The gas called oil. When you blow up a balloon, are you blowing oil into a balloon? No, that doesn't make sense. That's silly. So right there, we know that A is not correct, right? Spreads throughout the balloon. But it's not called oil, so that's not true. That's not correct. The gas what? B, turns into water vapor. Wow, you must have really hot breath if you can do that, right? But anyway, the gas is already a gas, right? So how can you turn into a water vapor? That doesn't make sense, right? Liquid turns into a water vapor. So it's not gas. That's incorrect. So let's take a look at C. The gas called air, yes, you're blowing a balloon up with air, spreads and fills all the space of the balloon. That's what a gas does, right? So that is correct. So that is the correct answer for that one. Okay, let's move on to our chart. We've seen this chart before. Now it's time to test our knowledge, test our memory. How can we fill in this chart? What we need to do is fill in the tops of this chart with the proper name of the form of the matter. We have 3 different pictures of different types of matter here, and then we have the definitions. Let's look at the first one. This is an apple. It is what? It is something that has its own shape. Actually, the answer is right there, right? Solid. It is a solid. A solid has its own shape. Okay? Over here, we have, what is this? Of course, you could say it's a solid, but we're talking about the form inside the glass pitcher. The glass pitcher is a solid, sure, but what's inside? Inside we have a liquid, right? Liquid. And what is it about a liquid? A liquid does not have its own shape. It takes the shape of the container. So when you pour a liquid into the solid, that liquid takes the shape of the container. Remember, it only fills up the bottom, not the whole thing. Now over here, of course, we're talking about a gas. That's our last one left. The gas does not have its own shape. That's similar to a liquid. These two things are the same. However, what's different is gas spreads to fill the container. Liquid does not spread to fill the container. A gas spreads to fill the entire container. And that's the difference between them. So, In Lesson 14, we were continuing our discussion about matter. And in Lesson 14, we learned that matter has three forms: solid, liquid, gas. And these forms will change depending on temperature. So solid will become a liquid if it melts. If you boil a liquid, it becomes gas, right? If you reduce the temperature, a gas will become a liquid, or a liquid will freeze into a solid. Okay, so that's very interesting. All matter has three different forms, and we can change those forms if we raise or lower the temperature of those forms. Well, very interesting. Hope you've learned some interesting things in this lesson, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.